Hello, welcome to our second virtual coffee special edition, the interview series. So let's go ahead and welcome our special guest. As interviewer, we have Graham Lutz, software architect, business owner, educator, and entrepreneur who just released his book, Crush the Developer Job Search. As interviewee, we have Brian Healy, here in a suit. He's a machine learning engineer and entrepreneur that has been in the tech biz for nearly 16 years. He's a graduate of Northeastern and Norwich and has helped two startups to acquisition while helping to raise over $1 million in venture capital. Worked on the original Amazon
100
Alexa
million.
team. Oh, excuse me. Yes, thank you. I'm so sorry. Just $100.
Yeah, $100.
And is currently the CTO and co-founder of the fintech startup Era. All right, so here's how this is going to work. Our interviewers have types. Some are good and some are bad. Our interview here has been assigned a type of interviewer, and we're going to reveal that after the end. You may be able to guess it beforehand, but go ahead and keep that to yourself. To set this up, Graham's already received Brian's CV and a job description. The interview is going to go for the next 20 to 30 minutes. He'll interview Brian as if this were his first interview. As our audience, during the interview, please take notes, prepare some questions, but hold them until the interview concludes. After the interview, we'll break character. Graham will provide some feedback and allow Brian to ask any questions that he might have. After the interview, you can kind of post your questions in the chat, and I'm going to go ahead and read those aloud. Remember, this is being recorded and will be posted online, so if you need to go, need to step away from the computer, by all means, please feel free to. You'll definitely be able to rewatch it. All right. Let's go ahead and have everyone other than Brian and Graham turn your video and your mics off, and we're going to take the next 20 to 30 minutes to watch this mock interview. Again, thank you, Brian, thank you, Graham, for taking the time to do this, and for volunteering.
Sure.
All right. Brian, thanks for coming today. Hey, I want to jump right into it super quick.
Bring it on.
So you got the job description. You should have a pretty good idea of kind of what we expect. I've got 20 minutes for you. I've got 6 or 7 other interviews scheduled today. So I want to start out, why am I going to hire you over anybody else?
Well, I've been experienced in machine learning for a large part of my career. I actually studied machine learning in college long before this was actually kind of a neat thing that the industry cared about. This is sort of a space that I am particularly passionate about, and it's a space that I have particularly high knowledge in. So if you're looking to build out a world-class NLU ASR team, I'm the guy that's going to run it.
Cool. All right, so let's do this. Will you just walk me through, got your resume here in front of me, walk me through your last couple positions, talk about, anything you think is valuable from your, that's in addition maybe to what's on your resume there.
Sure, you got it. So, for the last 2 years or so, I've been running machine learning at a fintech company. So, a little different than typical ASR NLU pipeline, but very similar cross paths. We've had to build out models that do transcribe and speech into text to sort of do analysis of events. We've built out NLU models to interpret that creation. And I've had to build out a team underneath me to sort of manage that pipeline, manage the creation of that back end. Scaled the company up from just 1 all the way up to now 18, still continuing to grow. Prior to that, I was at another company, a travel tech company, similarly in the machine learning space. That was a little bit more focused on pure linguistics, no real audio component, but a lot of strong recommendation elements to it. Had to build out complicated specific models for helping travelers sort of marry up with perfect recommendations through natural language. They would talk to a bot and essentially sort of get information piped through that way. Prior to that, I was at Amazon working on the Alexa products. So another sort of classic ASR NLU pipeline, managed a couple of teams while I was there. And overall, I just have had significant experience specifically managing and constructing a good machine learning team.
All right, I'm going to jump in here. Just go ahead and that's all I need for that.
Cool.
So you've had some employees quit. Why do employees quit? Why do your employees quit?
Why do employees quit for me? I'd like to think mostly because they're ready to move on to a different organization. They've gotten all that they're ready to get out of the one we have. But I would say probably the biggest reason that employees quit is looking to tackle the next big project. By and large, all the employees that have left orgs underneath me have done so because they're ready to take on a different role, and they've been with me for at least a year plus and are ready to go.
anything you think that's your fault for why they quit?
I'd like to think no. Like any good manager, any good mentor, you'd like to see the people underneath you continue to grow and succeed. Ideally, they grow and succeed within the company you're at and managing. But ultimately, we're all growing, we're all expanding. It's a tech industry. We tend to have transitions in and out. And when I see somebody taking on some new challenge that we weren't able to give them at the company we were at for whatever reason, I'm always happy to see that kind of success. And, I always say that there's a team out there that sort of has stemmed from the mentorship they've gotten via me, via the company, and it's always good to see that network grow, and hopefully by good word of mouth also helps on the backside, referrals in.
Got it. All right. Let's see. Next one. What would your worst enemy? How would your worst enemy describe you?
Ooh, interesting. My worst enemy describe me. Ruthless, probably. That's all you need. One word, ruthless. It's the nature of the business. I'd like to think that by and large we're mostly nurturing and mentoring people underneath us, but I've had my fair share of having to conduct layoffs, having to conduct PIPs and sort of other processes, and I hope it's not many, but there's probably somebody out there that's unhappy with that sort of arrangement, and that's probably how they describe it.
Okay. So one of the areas that we want to make sure that we are filling is obviously it's for a management position. Want to make sure that we have people who can deal with employee conflict among peers. Can you speak to a little bit of the conflict you've experienced as an employee, as a manager, and or with your peers, how you handle that, and kind of what your thought process is on that kind of thing?
Sure. I mean, conflict is inevitable. I mean, especially in any organization that's got sufficiently senior talent and crew, there's going to be times when they're creatively butting heads. And, ultimately I see that as my primary responsibility as a manager to make sure that I am able to resolve those conflicts, keep people happy as much as possible, or where absolutely necessary, separating that and sort of dealing with the conflict in more aggressive ways if needed. I can come up with some specific examples. There was times a couple of years ago, I obviously won't name names, but where my chief designer, as well as one of my chief engineers, had very different interpretations of how we were going to solve a specific problem related to building out the recommendation pipeline. Like most situations, it initially started as relatively clean. It was a typical design meeting and there was a lot of debate. But within 30 minutes or so, it was starting to escalate into much more of an outright argument, a little bit of yelling. Once it got to a point where it was pretty clear that the meeting had devolved and wasn't going to resolve, I called the meeting and set up one-on-ones with both engineers to sort of talk through the problem, figure out why this is having difficulty resolve. And ultimately, I ended up having to just make the decision. As the manager, it's my responsibility that ultimately, I would prefer my engineers and my direct reports sort of have a debate of ideas and come up with a solution amongst themselves democratically. But if they can't, that's ultimately where it's going to fall on me to sort of set the hammer. Here's, it's ready to go. And I mean, I can also come up with examples specifically of when things ultimately couldn't resolve and had to do things like transfer out employees or, I several years ago, I also won't name names, but I was dealing with a specific conflict where an engineer, two sets of engineers, both senior level, outright did not like each other, and they would even be vocal about the fact that they didn't like each other. And after having several weeks of one-on-one sessions and mediation sessions, it was finally decided that they were better suited to take one of them and transfer them to a different team. So I spent time negotiating with both about whether or not either had interest or opportunity to join another team within the organization, and we made it happen.
Very cool. All right, I want to ask a couple of tech questions. If you let me know what you know. That's kind of the idea here. Cool. Can you explain to me a HTTP response code 100?
Yeah.
Okay.
Honestly, couldn't. No, I don't have much of a specific web experience. Most of my technical background is in sort of back-end model construction, model development pipelines. So don't know that off the top of my head. I could quickly find it if you wanted.
Okay, so none of the HTTP codes, like that's not like you don't have any of that knowledge.
I know some of the basics, 400, 404 not found, 405 denied, 500 request not allowed. Like I know some of them that I've encountered in various API tasks, but certainly not the suite of codes.
Okay. Could you walk me through, in your own words, traversal of a binary tree?
Traversal binary. So it's been quite a long time since I've gone through CS fundamentals. So I probably wouldn't be able to give you a really good description, no. Certainly not a satisfactory one to fit a developer role.
All right. All right, I'll move on to some less technical questions. How many square feet of pizza is consumed in the US every year?
Outstanding. So I'm always a big fan of these kind of like logic questions. So, I don't think I have the exact answer for you, but I can tell you how I would arrive at the answer. So, like a creative perspective, obviously this is something we're going to be estimating. This is sort of a classic data science problem. So I'd have to start with population size. I'd have to develop some metrics around average number of slices of pizza eaten per person in the US. Take some differential for sort of the age distribution of the curve. You're probably not having 2-year-olds eating pizza. I'm not going to say 90-year-olds don't eat pizza, but they might be less inclined to eat a lot of pizza, and sort of come up with a likely distribution curve. And then I can simply apply that propositionally, or I could obviously come up with a rough sample that is less accurate, but has defensible data. I eat roughly a pizza a month. And if I extrapolate that to roughly 230 adult age Americans, we can probably come to a reasonable number. It'll be off by a significant order of magnitude, but at least it's got some data behind it.
All right. That's most of what I've got in terms of questions for you. Do you have any questions for me?
Sure. So I'd love to know a little bit more about the team you have now, how it's constructed, and sort of how it's being managed today. I'm presumably taking into a new role, and so I'd like to know a little bit more about what they're currently used to dealing with from a process point of view, and whether or not you think that needs some adjustment or management initially.
Sure. So I feel pretty strongly that we've got the team in place that we need. It's going to be a bit of a wedge job to get this role integrated. Really, what we're looking for is somebody who can partner with product and program management teams. Obviously, management experience is big. Business judgment, making decisions, that kind of thing. Dealing with conflict obviously is big. With the fast pace that we're working on, there's a lot of conflict between teams, within teams, that kind of thing. So really hoping to find somebody who can deal with that kind of stuff, and continue delivering product, large multi-year projects on time, despite those types of challenges.
Interesting. And so could you talk a little bit more about, you sort of described existing conflicts. Is that mostly sort of an inter-team issue? Would you ascribe that maybe to the existing style of development? Are there anything specifics you can give me on that as to what you think is the problem and how I can help resolve it?
Yeah, so seems to me more than anything, the issue is surrounding developer performance. I see just a lot of issues with conflict, a lot of issues with commitment among the developers. The leadership team of which you would be a part, I feel pretty strongly that everybody's good at what they do. Again, obviously there's conflict there as well. Sure. But yeah, the main issues that I see us facing are commitment among the engineers and engineering delivering on what the expectations are. So with that in mind, you have some thoughts around how you approach that?
Yeah, certainly. So when I hear words like conflict and commitment, the first thing that comes immediately to mind is that there's a process problem. You know, there needs to be some way to better organize and manage the deliverables to make sure that everybody's on the same page, to make sure that tasks are properly doled out and distributed, and make sure that engineers understand their deadlines, understand the commitment required to reach things. And then ultimately, you know, after an analysis of how the pipeline is set up, it's worth knowing, is there a gap here? Does there need to be additional engineers added to the pipeline? Is there work that needs to be gapped from the engineers that are there? Is there mentorship gaps that will be need to take some of the more junior and mid-tier level up? And so I think there'll be a period initially of just sort of getting to know the team, getting to know the process, and sort of finding ways that we can make it work a little smoother.
Got it. All right. Any more questions for me before we wrap things up here?
No, that sounds good to me. I mean, it sounds like an interesting challenge. I certainly like a challenge. It'd be nice to come in and see how I can gap up the performance of the team, sort of help you resolve some of those conflicts and take on the world.
Cool. Awesome. Well, our next steps, I will get back with the team, and we will, if we choose to move forward, have some feedback for you.
Sounds great. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. Good job. Thank you so much for this. This was really fun. Graham, why don't you go ahead and tell the audience what type of interviewer you were in this situation?
All right. So I was supposed to be the supportive, fun-loving.
Yes.
I got that sense. I felt the love.
I hope you did. No, I was the asshole interviewer, which I have experienced a number of times. So channel.
Sure, we all have.
So everyone knows I apologize to Brian in advance. I apologize again, Brian. That was very uncomfortable for me.
Yeah.
I could tell in your eyes you weren't committed to the asshole.
Yeah. Well, the problem is I was trying to be like, you know, unaffected and uninterested, but you were very interesting. And I found myself.
That's good to know.
Like, I should remember that.
I pull you in.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was nice to watch this, and I definitely had a few moments where I was like, did he just look at his phone?
Yeah.
The phone was brilliant. I definitely noticed that. Yeah.
That was all part of the act, everybody.
Awesome. Brian, you did get a chance to ask a few questions of Graham, your interviewer. Was there any questions that maybe you didn't get a chance to ask that you would have liked to ask to maybe even kind of salvage the situation, redirect the situation, or maybe have an opportunity to speak a little bit more on something that you wanted to ensure got out in the interview?
Sure. So, I mean, interestingly enough, one of the questions I thought to ask would pull back on, for anyone who doesn't, I don't remember how much was shared, but the original job description was for pretty much a pure management role. It was well described for somebody who's going to come in and build and scale out a team. And so the introduction of technical questions felt almost like a gotcha. And so my immediate reaction would have been, wish I could have performed better on the technical questions. I wasn't prepared for that. This is sort of a strength management role. Are you looking for a player coach? Is that sort of like the ideal scale here? Or are you looking for somebody that's more on sort of the director level to come in and build out an org just to get a better sense of it? Curiously, I mean, in the knowing it was an act, but in a real scenario where the interview was like this, I was pretty much already on the no side of the fence, like for obvious reasons. And so there was a little bit of unconscious pullback. Like, I don't need to ask too many questions. I don't need too much detail here because I already kind of know that this is probably not for me. But I wanted to at least frame all of the questions in as much of a positive light as I could, both to keep a good impression. You know, if you say no to things, you still have to deal with people in the industry, as well as maybe my impression's wrong and it might end up sort of adjusting as I sort of talk through the problem set.
Awesome. Graham, why don't you go ahead and give your feedback about this interview to Brian, kind of as from your position. But just remember, if anybody in the audience has any questions, please go ahead and throw those in the chat while Graham shares his feedback, and I will read them at the end.
So I'm very impressed, Brian. Not surprised that I'm impressed that you were able to deal with that. Obviously, you've had lots of success and dealt with a lot of probably hard people in your career. One of the things that I was attempting to do was to pull you into a speed that isn't your comfortable speed.
Yeah, I could tell.
And I think that you were probably speaking much more quickly than you normally do and are comfortable doing.
Yeah,
right.
I was. Yeah.
Ironically,
I detected that you were doing that and tried to force myself, but the situation, the energy of the situation, you still kind of inevitably speed up a little bit to sort of match the speaker. Yeah.
Right. But yeah, I mean, overall, like I don't have any feedback in terms of how you could better have answered those kinds of clearly gotcha questions. And then like I asked the gotcha question, you answered, and then I just sat there to see if you'd talk more. And I think you handled that very well. Like, I think really good. So I think the only thing that I would that would be my piece of feedback. And I think that's for everybody else to be aware of, right? And so I think, especially if you're early on in your interviewing career with this kind of thing, it's very easy to get like yanked into the stress and the of all the technical stuff and the gotchas and the antagonistic feeling. So yeah, I think going into
that sense of fluster where everything sort of like starts to accelerate. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. I was thinking if I got done with this, all my questions and everything, we were done in under 20 minutes, and I've like accomplished that. Right.
I like it.
Yeah.
Pull it through.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. I think it's really important to focus on the fact that you as an interviewer did kind of keep forcing him to speak a little bit faster, and then you purposely interjected some of these weird, awkward pauses where our human nature is just like start spitting out words because you want to fill the silence. And we have to be cognizant of just the human dynamics that are going on when two people to converse in an interview. So I think this was a great moment to see that, as well as to like go into an interview in the future thinking about like these situations that you want to be very cognizant of. All right, so let's go ahead and go ahead. Sorry, Graham.
I was just going to say, Brian mentioned that relatively quickly he knew that this was a no for him, right? Even if I offered a second interview with more people, like he wouldn't have taken it, right?
Yeah.
And so I think in the chat we're talking about this a little bit. Like this is a huge red flag. I think there are more than enough job opportunities out there for people who are skilled in this area that there's no reason you need to move forward with this kind of thing. But I think the way Brian handled it is perfect, right? You don't want to be like, all right, we're done here.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Still leave a good taste.
Through the interview, end on a positive note. Don't make enemies, but you don't need to move forward.
Exactly. Yeah, like we always say, you're interviewing the company too. Like I think people lose track of that a lot. Like they get very on defensive, and it's much easier to just sort of like respond to the wave, but it's got to go bi-directionally.
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and get to the questions in the chat. Again, if you have them, please drop them in the chat. We'll make sure that they get answered. But Graham, you kind of touched upon this question already about wouldn't this type of interview be a really big red flag for company culture? I feel like I wouldn't want to move forward after this. I think you answered that very well. Is there potentially even other red flags that we could address right now, since we're talking about red flags during an interview? Is there anything might be glaringly obvious other than this whole particular experience?
I mean, there's definitely a couple of like key things that like as an interviewer, I would have picked up on quickly that I'm sure Graham was doing very intentionally, but I'll call them out explicitly. So the fact that he mentioned, how do I deal with conflict, instead of trying to frame it or phrase it as things like, how would you resolve conflict? Can you talk me through a time when you've had to like resolve an issue with a team? Like it wasn't positively framed, it was negatively framed. And so it was very clearly sort of trying to set that tone of, I experienced lots of issues day to day. Tell me how you're going to brute force your way through it. Like it sort of just gives me a window into how they're thinking about problems, how they're thinking about this management role and what they expect the person to have to do.
I would agree, and I think Graham, you phrased a kind of like a follow-up question to something Brian said, was like, was that your fault? Do you see that as your fault? And it was almost like it was an egging on of like putting Brian on the defensive, as opposed to, being optimistic, or looking at it from a very distant perspective. It was like already like setting the mindset of like, I see this as your fault. Like, did you see this as your fault? I thought that was kind of interesting, that if that was how you as an interviewer approached that kind of follow up to that comment of like, is that the company culture? Is the company culture to place blame? Is the company culture to point fingers? So that kind of was something that struck me as like, ooh, that's, I mean, in everything else, ooh, that was a red flag for me.
I'll also say I jokingly said, oh, sorry, go ahead, Grant.
No, continue, please.
I was actually going to move on to a different one. So if you have some comment on that, definitely.
Then I'll touch on that. So there is the feeling of kind of antagonism often in interviews. It's me versus you, right? Or I get that feeling when I'm being interviewed a lot. And those are the kinds of things that I just have no interest in, right?
Right.
And so as far as I'm concerned, that's a red flag. If somebody does any kind of gotchas, like I'm not interested. You know what I mean? And so, when I am interviewing, a lot of what I am trying to do is just find out, hey, is this a great fit? Like, are we going to work really well together? Not because I don't want to find out what you do wrong, or I'm not trying to rule you out necessarily. I'm just trying, let's just have a conversation, and then we can mutually agree if we think this is going to work. You know what I mean?
I love the way you worded that. It's a conversation. That's exactly right. It should be a dialogue.
Yeah.
We're getting to know each other.
Right. Yeah. Right. And I feel like, as the interviewer, when I'm interviewing people, I mean, I get just as nervous. Like, I'm really impressed with this person. Out of the 300 resumes, like, I picked this person, like, I hope they like me, So, like,
Right. You want them to work here. It's like,
yeah. And I have a couple of options, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so that was kind of related, but what were you going to move to, Brian?
Crap. It'll come to me.
It's about red flags, I'm assuming. At least it was tangentially related to red flags, if that helps to prompt your memory for a moment.
Well, I mean, I can start with others anyway. So it was actually also, you called it out specifically that I liked, but it's related to the gotchas. So like that gap of silence that you specifically placed in there. I've seen a lot of interviews use that as an explicit technique, and it drives me crazy. I know what they're doing, and it sort of fits into that same category of, why are you trying to trip somebody up? Not everybody is great at handling battling dialogue. Some people can, but some people can't. But it has nothing to do with the skill in the role. And so trying to do that and just make somebody like vomit words to see what they come up with, I find very manipulative.
Absolutely. I would agree with that. The awkwardness of a forced silence. I mean, the process of an interview should be a conversation to determine mutual fit, to try to get to know an individual, and it's that forced silence where our human nature to just fill it just can be sabotaging, or could be an opportunity to just interject like a way to reposition the conversation or drive the conversation in a different direction. But most of the people, at least myself being one of those, don't always think about using that silence as a redirection of sorts. So I find that silence a little bit awkward and off-putting. Glad to know that both of you do as well. We had a couple more comments here in the chat. And again, Brian, if your memory gets jogged about what you wanted to share, jump back in.
I'll jump back in.
Let's see. Nick said that he would probably have to look up some of those things that you were asked as well. And Nick, that's for what you deal with, in a day-to-day. So it just kind of proves that some of these questions of being asked, the more technical questions, that you're in an interview. We rely upon Google. We rely upon our resources, and being expected to output definitions of sorts. It's just it's not always the best questions.
Ironically, that jogged my memory on what I was going to say, which is one of the other like quick red flags that I always hear is those logic puzzles. I sort of get. I've actually talked about this before. Like, I sort of get why employers sometimes like them and why they use them. They're just trying to at least I hope, in theory, they're just trying to get you to talk about how your creative process solves problems. So they give you sort of a weird, boundless, dataless problem and say, okay, what would you do? And if it's framed that way, it's not horrible. You know, at least that way I can sort of walk through a technique I might employ. But some employers don't seem to take that tact. And Graham did a good job of doing that. It was literally, give me the answer to a question that's absurd.
Yes.
And
Unanswerable question.
exactly. And so and you know, if I was willing to be snarky, it's been like, I'll just Google it and I'll get you the answer. Because I used to joke that the super common question when I was first coming up with the industry was the ping pong balls in a 747 one, which I find hilarious because now if you Google how many ping pong balls are there in a 747, Boeing.com has the answer as a front line. And so it just like highlights exactly the point of like, it's not about the answer, it's about the mind, the creative process, how you are arriving at solutions. And so beware of how the question is being asked, because that might be the red flag or it might not, but it sort of walks a tightrope. Exactly what information are they looking to gather from you by asking the question?
And I feel like that idea can be applied to anything for which you don't know the answer.
Right.
Yes.
Like anytime
Yes.
I'm in an interview and my answer is I don't know, it's actually I don't know, and here was my process for how I would come to know.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I often explain that, you know, my value is not in the Rolodex of information in my head.
Right.
Right. The value that I bring is problem solving. As an individual contributor anyway, which is what you guys are mostly going to be moving towards, right? The value is problem solving, and this is how I solve problems. So I don't know the answer, but I have a process by which I can know the answer. And that applies to all the other answers I also don't know. So one thing that I have found, technical interviews are just terrible. Like it's very hard to have a good experience as the interviewee in a technical interview. And I feel like I have a few ideas as to why. The answers that you do know feel comfortable and no problem, and you answer them quick, and then that portion of the interview is gone. And even if you have 5 or 6 answers that you can answer very well, you answer them quickly, and that's done. But then the 5 or 6 questions that you can't answer, that's where, you know, 70% of the time of the interview ends up settling, right? So even if you've answered a lot of things right, you still will come away feeling like, oh, like I got all that wrong because a lot of the time was spent on the stuff that isn't what you just know like that. Right? Has that been your
And you're
experience?
exactly right, Graham. Like the process is what matters. I like the way you described that. It's about, I don't need you to know all the answers. In fact, it'd be kind of weird if you did. It's, I just want to see how you think. Just like, let me know if I gave you a similar problem that you don't know how to solve in work, what are you then going to go do? Like, how are you going to approach a problem?
I love that, Graham. The fact that you outlined it that way kind of has provided extreme clarity on my own interview experience. You know, coming out of an interview, say you have 10 questions and you can answer 6 of them, like, bam, you know it, like the back of your hand, you feel great. But it's those 4 that you're just like, I need to Google this. I can't vocalize what I know. It's those 4 that you have that feeling on, that's your takeaway from the situation. And it's so important that we point out that, that happens. This is normal. This is potentially what us as humans will feel like, but that's, not necessarily the focus of that particular situation. We have to figure out how you think, what you know, but you're not expected to know everything because we are not Rolodexes, we just need to know how to find the answer very well.
Yeah. And I think Brian would probably agree. Like, when I'm interviewing people, I don't expect right answers.
No,
and I don't even care in most cases. Like, I'm not even all that worried about the right answer. You know what I mean? Especially so one of the things that I do in interviews for the technical portion anyway, is I give people options, right? So they can do live coding with me, right? And we can just talk through a problem and you can code it live. Or a take-home test, right? Where here's the thing, send it to me in 2 days, right?
Yep.
Or submit to me your best piece of code.
Nice.
Right? and then
I
we
like
can
that.
have a discussion, right? So my thought is that people just work different ways, you know? And I have people
Yep.
who pick, I'll do live coding. That seems absolutely bonkers to me. I would
Right?
never
Yeah.
pick such a thing, right? But there are
Neither would
people
I.
who that's what feels comfortable, right? And my goal as the interviewer is I really just want to find out how you work best and what you know and where you're at and that kind of stuff. And so as far as I'm concerned, making you do like a whiteboard interview, like that's a red flag to me,
Yeah.
right? Like
Agreed.
as far as I'm concerned, that is not a process by which you can reliably find out how good this person will be in this job.
Yeah.
Yep. Totally agree. In fact, myself, related, my default is never to do coding in an interview. I don't, that's not how people code. And so it's
Right.
instantly got them on their heels. So I agree with you. Like if they choose to, like if I give them an interesting problem and they just jump up to the whiteboard and start doing stuff, like, okay, I'm going to let you do your thing. But that's not what I would highly unlikely to ever say in a technical interview, please go to the whiteboard and do some pseudocode so that you can solve this problem that I'm giving you.
Yeah.
Interestingly
Awesome.
enough, sort of on a related topic, and I just wanted to call it out because I did it explicitly. Similarly, if there's a question that is too direct to have creative discussion, like the binary tree one, just talk, and you don't have a good answer, it's okay to say, I don't know, and go quiet.
Yeah.
Oftentimes I will catch interviewees when I know they got hit with a question they didn't have a good answer for, they'll just start going, trying to stumble upon something, and I don't hold it against them. It happens, but as giving advice, it's not a bad idea to just go, I don't know, but I could find out, and just leave it at that.
Yeah.
A little bit of I guess feedback or a question for you, Brian, about that. I've always been told whenever you do run into those situations where you don't know something, that you can say like legit I don't know is a very valid response to something, but it's also important to maybe highlight what you do know. So like if you are tangentially familiar with a particular topic, just say this is what I know about it. Make sure that it's what you actually know and that it's potentially a valid or correct in some capacity, but don't feel the need to necessarily share that if you don't know anything. Is that a valuable tactic to say, okay, linked lists, I know this is what a linked is and the linked list is in the broadest capacity. Is that a valuable way to answer that question?
I think it could be. Yeah, it would depend on the question and depend on the context. But I think, yes, if you do have a meaningful tangent to offer it. I think my only warning is that oftentimes I think people feel that that's how they have to answer questions they get stuck on.
Okay.
And that's when the rambling happens. So like, just be really
Perfect.
cognizant of, is this really a tangent that's worth sharing? Or is it better to say, I just truthfully don't know. I could find out and get you a great answer, but I don't have that on my fingertips.
Perfect. That's amazing to hear that. And for at least personally myself, would assuage any concerns about like, how do I handle the moment when I genuinely don't know something? And, being able to deal with that situation with either saying, I don't know, or I don't know, but this is what I'm familiar with in the particular topic, is empowering because it puts you a little bit at ease, it makes the situation a little bit less stressful.
And I mean, interestingly enough, there should be a good interviewer won't have very many questions where that has to be the answer. Like the part of the problem was that it was way too specific a question. It wasn't a creative question. It was just talk me through a CS fundamental that I want to hear you talk about for a second. Most questions should be broad enough that you can sort of go, well, I don't know the answer, but here's how I would solve it. I would do X, Y, and Z. So like it's a little bit of a problem with the question, not the interviewer.
Okay. Awesome.
So another red flag. How are they?
Awesome. That's actually all the questions that we have in the chat specifically for Brian and Graham. I want to say thank you to everyone for joining. If you need to run, by all means, please feel free to run. This is being recorded. But let's go ahead and open up to maybe some general questions about interviewing or have a general conversation about interviewing. So if you would like to turn your camera back on, please feel free to do so. And let's just go ahead and openly talk about this. This is a chance to ask some questions for two very talented individuals here, and let's learn something new today.
Cool.
All right. Anybody
So-
want to go first?
I might start by saying just that you're not going to know everything. Interviewing is hard and taxing and
Yep.
it's generally a terrible process. Like I know early on for me, like it very quickly, when I was looking for my first development interview and was getting to these tech interviews, it very quickly felt like I can't do this. Like
Yeah,
there's
it
no
does.
way I'm going to get a job. Right.
Yeah.
But I guess what I want to get across is that that's normal.
So yeah, it's a universal feeling.
Yeah, and I don't think it changes. Like I get nervous for every interview I go to. It doesn't matter even if I know everything they're talking about. It's just nerves. It's a good thing I think, but it still rattles you a bit. And but it's I don't know. People handle things differently, but I've just found even when I've had these super big technical interviews where I've read up on trees and stuff as refreshers. Even when I go into the interview and I still am should they be hiring me? Am I good enough? It's I don't know. It's self-doubt a bit, but it just I don't know. I just find interviews generally it just rattle me regardless.
And I mean, to some degree, I think that's almost just a function. Like Graham made an excellent point. Like this is grueling even when it goes well. Even when you have a great interview that went end to end, it's like multiple hours talking endlessly about creative processing. It's not fun. It's not easy. It takes a toll on you. So I think that sensation of this is stressful. This is not that's universal. Even when you're at a senior level and interviews are kind of a breeze from a implementation point of view, it still is taxing. It's still not great experience.
Along those lines, I've heard of some people interviewing first at companies that are not super high stakes for them to practice, kind of like a PSAT deal. Is that a recommended approach, or
I recommend that.
What's that?
So I gave a talk to a digital crafts bootcamp cohort the other day. And one of the things that I said, I asked who was already interviewing. And maybe half the room raised their hand. Half of those were kind of doing this. And then I asked why. And it was oh, because I haven't done this. I'm not ready for this. I haven't. And I just said, start. I think
Right.
you just go do interviews. Because getting a job as a developer takes a different skill set than completing a job as a developer. Right? So the interviewing and the networking and the resume and all these things, there is a whole set of things you have to be able to do. And so I say get as many interviews as you can, anywhere you can, and just do them. Because your first interview is going to suck.
Yep.
As is your second, and likely your third. Your seventh is going to feel much more comfortable.
Yeah.
Right? Your eighth interview, hell, I've already answered 60%, 70% of these questions. I
Right.
know how to tell my story without any cortisol, adrenaline. None of that happens for 70% of the interview now because I've done this 10 times in the last couple of weeks. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So if your first interview is with that job you have to have, you'll be sorry, right? Anything
And
to add
sort
to
of-
that, Brian?
Okay.
No, I'm asking
just-
if you have anything to add.
Oh yeah. So I was gonna say, and to piggyback on that, and many people probably don't even want to hear this, I'll even recommend continuing to do that. Most people will keep interviewing even when they have the job they want, just to keep that muscle strong. It helps you network. Interviews, it's sort of related to sort of an underbelly of what we've been talking about. Interviews are not adversarial by nature if they're good at interviews. So there's nothing really wrong with interviewing with a company for a role, even if you don't really have any intention of taking it. You're learning a new company, you're learning new engineers, you're networking a little bit. You're not wasting anyone's time, and you never know. When you take the interview, you might find, oh, this is excellent. I love the role, of the people, the offer's great. Maybe I do take it, so that never stops. It's not because once you've got the job, that you want, you're just well, now I'm not gonna interview again for 3 years until I'm ready to look again. Keep it out there, and keep working, because it's, yeah, exactly. Graham's exactly right. It's another skill. It's not really related to being an engineer. It's its own skill and requires practice.
Yeah, as far as I've seen so far, it seems like tech is at the forefront of the new idea of moving between companies to move up instead of moving up in one company.
Yeah.
As far as I can see.
Yeah.
Now you apologies,
No, go ahead.
feedback. You mentioned kind of like continuing to interview, and as someone who's been in the industry for a really long time, do you think that the style of interviewing has evolved, and that would be one reason why that you should continue to interview, is just as the industry evolves, as the interviewing style evolves, obviously you need to know what to expect. Otherwise you don't interview for 10 years, you go to interview again and wow, I don't know how to do this anymore. Like this is not how it was 10 years ago.
I think it's actually a mix of both of those. So like it's the accepted standard style that like a lot of good companies will sort of follow, that will evolve over time, and it has throughout my career. But even more broadly than that, individual companies are all different, and every individual interviewers are different. But there are kind of archetypes, and so like if you do it more frequently, you start to detect style. You start to detect how to handle different people, different personality types, different interview types. It becomes another skill set that you have, like a toolbox. Like, oh, this is this type of interview. I can kind of take out that tool. Oh, this is this company, and you sort of like move with the situation.
That's fair. That's fair. Anyone else have any questions, or even just curious about the interviewing process, or desire advice in any capacity about this?
I'd add one thing, and this is probably more once you're a little more into your career, but like
Sure.
you'll start getting approached by recruiters pretty frequently. And like when I'm at a job that I really love, I just, it depends. You can detect when the recruiters are clearly using a template and stuff, but when I see that somebody has actually taken the time to look up my profile, they mentioned something that they wouldn't have, they can only know that by actually looking into my stuff.
Yep.
Then I'll respond to them if whatever they're promoting it seems interesting, and I'll just say like, I'm really happy where I am right now, but you know what, hit me up in 6 months or whatever, see how things are going, you know. And most of the recruiters that I've been in contact with typically do that. They just, you know, because their job is to hire people. Like they're just like a funnel, so yeah. They'll just put a little calendar update or whatever, say contact that person or whatever. And you know, doesn't mean I'm going to leave my job, but you know, like it's just kind of a freebie in a way of like, hey, how's things going with your work situation, you know?
Yeah. And I mean, even that's a great approach, but I would even say, even don't feel uncomfortable saying, let's have a chat, you know, and get on the phone. Maybe you're not going to go anywhere past that initial chat, but you're networking with the recruiter, learning a little bit about the company, and you sort of get things into a decent place. So yeah, I think that's a great approach. Yeah.
Do you guys have anything? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, well, I was just going to go along with that. Is it related question or unrelated question?
I was just gonna see if you guys had anything more to offer on the process of discerning between recruiters, because I've heard that's a mixed bag. So.
All right, that's where I was going to go, actually. Okay. So
good.
From my perspective, the vast majority of recruiters are worse than useless. Right? So like 9 out of 10, I would say, are a recruiter because they got a psychology degree and the recruiting company was hired. Right? So like most of them did not decide, what I want to do? Tech recruiting, you know? So like most of them are there by accident. They're not good. They're not going to be here for years. And so you can generally figure that out relatively quickly. Right. So like Nick mentioned, like you can tell if it's just you're one of 1,000 emails they sent with the same thing. Right. And so early on, it just takes some work to talk with a bunch. So talk with pretty much everybody, and you'll start to figure out what are the things that lead me to believe, what are the things that will allow me to know this is a person who's probably good at this and I should spend my time here. Right. Yep. So like, you know, some of them are if they clearly they've looked at your specific resume and not just, hey, I saw your resume in our database and I'm impressed with your experience. You know, like I got that
Right.
early on, and my response was, if you are impressed with my experience, you are not a person I want to work with. Right? Like I literally have not had a developer
You're like-
job yet, and you are coming at me with this, you know. So
Sort of
that's-
related to that, it's always funny when you get really imbalanced outreach. Like I you know, like I'll still to this day sometimes get clearly automated emails saying, we've got a junior tier React developer role for you.
Yeah. Or if you've been in
I've
web
never worked
development,
with React. Yeah.
the one that cracks me up always is like, if you've been in web development, I can't tell you how many positions for Java have been offered versus JavaScript.
Right.
Because
Like
they're just like,
some
oh,
keyword
Java.
generator was like, yeah.
yeah, I get that often. Like so I have basically a script that I respond to emails and LinkedIn messages with, because I don't want to just ignore all the recruiters, because any one recruiter, there's potential that this person is going to get me a badass offer at some point in the future, right? So like I don't want to dismiss everyone, but I also don't want to spend time dealing with all of them. So I just have a response that is, you know, either, you know, if it's going to be a yes, I'll talk to you about this specific job, then I'll say that. But if it's no, and here's why, this is what I'm looking for, right? Salary range, tech stack, you know, like the level I want to be, right? So like I'm not real interested in individual contributor role now, right? So like those kinds of data points, this is what I'm looking at or looking for. And to one of the points Brian made earlier, I was going to say this earlier, one of the jobs that I have gotten came from a recruiter who I was just willing to have a conversation with, not because I was looking, not even because the job that he was bringing to me at that moment was exactly what I wanted. But we had the conversation. I was able to, you know, communicate my value as a developer, right? That if he were to get me in front of a hiring manager, that would be good for him, right? And then explained very clearly, this is what I'm looking for. Like, this is what my next position is gonna look like if I'm gonna move, because I'm happy, right? And literally 4 months later, he called me up and said, Graham, I found it. You know, it was the tech stack I wanted. It was remote. It was the salary I wanted. It was all these things that I said were important to me. Literally, he called me. I was not looking for a job. I interviewed the following day, and then 2 days after that, and had an offer by that evening.
I love it.
Like, yeah.
Sort of related and piggybacking on that, when you find those people, drag them with you everywhere. I reach out to the same recruiters when I'm looking both for work or if I'm looking to hire. I'm like, I know this person's background, and then even related to that, it's always good to get warm intros to recruiters, just like you do jobs. So like if you're looking for a gig, ask somebody senior, like, what recruiters do you work with? Can I reach out to somebody? And I'm sure they'll be happy to say, yeah, work with this company, this group. You know.
Yeah, I can think off the top of my head 6 or 8 recruiters that I feel confident a year from now they're still going to be a recruiter, right?
Yep, exactly. They're not going anywhere. They join this because they like it.
They like it
because
and
they fell into
they
it.
are a professional and here on purpose, and you know, building the career. And even if they are no longer an individual recruiter, maybe they manage a group of recruiters, but I can feel pretty confident that interacting with them is going to be worth my time, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I've got that list who I interact with, you know. If they often reach out to me, and if they don't, I do about once a quarter try to like make touches.
Yeah, have coffee, have a meeting. Yeah, just like you do it.
So maybe for more junior individuals who has very tangential experience with recruiters, how does someone very junior get started with just trying to find what a good recruiter looks like? You know, it's you'll always have the recruiter that won't take no for an answer, or, you know, or send you Java jobs for JavaScript experience, you know, the ones that just clearly have not read your resume. How does someone get started talking to a recruiter? Is there any suggestions for that?
I mean, Graham hit one of the most important points to me, which is have a phone conversation with them and make sure you're sussing out, did they do any research on this? Like, did they actually know you at all? Did they do, or are they just hitting like a Rolodex of emails and numbers that they have? That's an instant red flag. Like good recruiters, their entire commission pool, their entire structure is based around they bring good candidates to roles that they're trying to staff. And so they should care immediately about the people they're talking to. Like, this is the person that might fit well. And if I give them to this company, they're going to be happy that I did so, even if they don't hire them. They're not going to feel like I wasted their time. And so, yeah, that's a big part of it. Quickly get a sense of, did they do any research on me? Do they know what my background is? And are they just looking for more and they want to dig in versus just the, the crib sheet.
And not just the individual, like do they care about, well, relatively care about the company that they're trying to hire you for? Like, do they know a bit about the company aside from like they emailed me the job posting, like I remember working at one startup where like the guy's like, yeah, the founder's pretty cool, this is what it's like, kind of, just that little extra. It's like
yeah.
Awesome.
Well, I need to jump off here. I've got another meeting starting actually right now.
Nope, no worries.
Thanks, Brian.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
That was fun.
Thank you.
Cool. See y'all.
See you, Graham. Thank you. That actually brings us up on the hour mark, so I want to be respectful of Graham and Brian's time. Huge shout out to Becca, who fearlessly continues to embrace ways to support this community, and of course Grant Laborde for even suggesting this series and helping us to solidify this idea into kind of a final product. If you haven't joined our Slack community already, and if you'd like to do so, I'll drop the link in the chat real quick. Excuse me. So much good stuff is happening there. Mentorship, the conversation, it continues to grow, and it really allows us to kind of connect and continue various conversations well after these events are over. I want to wish everyone a wonderful day and have a wonderful evening.